The first sign something was wrong was the dumpster in the driveway. It was parked crooked beside my grandmother's hydrangeas, the same blue ones she used to cut and float in a glass bowl on the kitchen table every Sunday. A man in a neon vest was carrying out dining room chairs I'd known my whole life like they were broken office furniture. Another guy had the front door propped open with a crowbar. I pulled my car so hard to the curb my daughter's backpack slid off the seat. "Stay here," I told Emma, but my voice didn't even sound like mine. I got out holding the peach pie I'd baked that morning, because it was my grandmother's birthday and for 11 months after she died, I still drove to her house on that day like muscle memory could bring a person back. When I hit the porch, the man with the crowbar put a hand up. "Ma'am, you can't go in there." I stared at him. "Excuse me? This property's under new ownership." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because for half a second my brain refused to let the sentence in. "No, it isn't." He gave me the tired look people use when they think you're about to become a problem. "We closed last week." "You closed on what?" "The house." My grip loosened. The pie slipped, hit the porch, and burst open between us. Warm peaches spread across the wood my grandfather had sealed by hand 40 years ago. I remember saying, very calmly, "My grandmother lived here." The man shrugged once. "Then you need to talk to whoever sold it." I called my mother right there, standing over smashed peaches and cinnamon and crust. She answered on the fourth ring and said, "Claire, I was going to tell you." That was the moment I understood two things. My family had sold Grandma Ruth's house without telling me. And the only reason I found out was because strangers were already tearing it apart. What none of them knew yet, what would change everything, was that Grandma had made one quiet decision years earlier, and my name was still on the deed. If you're enjoying stories about real-life challenges, personal growth, and unforgettable life lessons, consider subscribing to the channel. New stories are released regularly, and you won't want to miss the next one. My grandmother used to say houses could tell on people. Spend enough time in one place, she'd tell me, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and the walls will remember who slammed doors, who cried in the laundry room, who made soup when somebody was sick, who stayed and who left. When I was a kid, I thought that was just one more Ruth Holloway line, filed somewhere between "Never trust a man with shiny shoes" and a soft handshake and "You can learn more in 10 minutes washing dishes with someone than in a year of polite conversation." By the time I was 40, divorced, and raising a 13-year-old daughter in a 2-bedroom apartment over a dentist's office, I knew she was right. That little white house on Alder Street remembered everything. It remembered my grandfather, whose laugh used to hit the ceiling before anybody else had gotten the joke. It remembered my father leaving when I was 14 and my mother pretending not to crumble in front of people. It remembered the summer I came home from college after getting my heart broken and slept for 2 days in my old room while Grandma quietly kept everyone away. It remembered the winter my marriage cracked open for good, when Emma was 6 and I showed up at Grandma's back door with one suitcase, a car seat, and a face so swollen from crying she took one look at me and said, "Put the baby down." Then tell me what that fool did. She never said, "I told you so," even though she could have. For almost a year after my divorce, that house was our landing place. I slept in the room with the yellow curtains. Emma colored on the kitchen floor while Grandma made grilled cheese cut into triangles. On the worst nights, when I was sure I had failed at marriage, at motherhood, at adulthood in general, Grandma would sit across from me with a mug of tea and say, "Starting over is expensive, humiliating, and holy work. Do it anyway." That house didn't just belong to my grandmother. It held the version of me that had survived. So when she got sick 3 years before she died, I didn't think in terms of sacrifice. I thought in terms of returning something. My mother lived 20 minutes away but always had reasons. Her back was acting up. Work was busy. Traffic was bad. My younger brother Scott lived in Nashville and sent flowers and long texts about how guilty he felt. My Aunt Denise flew in twice a year from Arizona and took a lot of photos for Facebook with captions about cherishing precious family time. I was the one who took Grandma to cardiology appointments, refilled prescriptions, labeled freezer meals, argued with insurance, unclogged the shower drain, and learned exactly how much cinnamon she liked in oatmeal when food started tasting like cardboard to her. I did it while working full-time as a billing coordinator at a physical therapy clinic and helping Emma through middle school and pretending I wasn't tired enough to cry in grocery store parking lots. Grandma never made speeches about it. That wasn't her style. But every so often, when we were alone, she'd look at me in that direct way she had and say, "I know who's here." I didn't understand then how much weight that sentence carried. After she died, the funeral passed in a blur of casseroles, church perfume, folded hands, and people telling me she was in a better place. My mother took over the visible part of grief, the flowers, the pastor, the paperwork, and I let her, because the alternative was screaming. The first week after the funeral, I couldn't bring myself to go into the kitchen. Her glasses were still on the windowsill above the sink. The grocery list in her handwriting still said celery, milk, stamps, birdseed. Her cardigan was draped over the chair like she'd just stood up for a second and would be back asking why nobody ever put the good knives back where they belonged. Then life did what it always does. It kept moving with an insultingly steady rhythm. Emma had school. I had work. Rent was due. Brakes needed replacing. The world didn't care that the one person who had made every hard thing feel survivable was gone. My mother started saying practical things. "We'll have to decide what to do with the house. We can't keep paying utilities forever. Your grandmother wouldn't want it sitting empty." I hated those conversations, so I ducked them. Partly because grief made me cowardly, and partly because I believed, stupidly, as it turned out, that no one would make a final decision without talking to me first. Not because I thought I deserved special treatment. Because I thought I was family. Standing on the porch with peach filling at my feet, I found out what that word meant to some people. My mother finally called me back an hour after our first conversation ended in me hanging up on her. I was parked 3 streets over because I couldn't stand to watch the men carry out more of Grandma's things. Emma sat beside me, silent in the way only kids get when they know the grown-up world is breaking in front of them. My phone lit up with Mom. I answered with, "How could you do this?" She exhaled like I was the difficult one. "Claire, lower your voice." "I'm in my car." "Then lower your attitude." I stared through the windshield. "You sold Grandma's house." "We sold the property," she corrected. "There's no reason to be dramatic." Emma turned her face toward the window. "Dramatic?" I said. "I found out because men were throwing her furniture into a dumpster. They're clearing it out for renovation." "Renovation?" My throat tightened. "You sold it to flippers?" "To an investor, yes. It was the best offer." "No one told me." "We were going to tell you after everything was finalized." "Why after?" There was a pause just long enough to tell me the answer before she said it. "Because you get emotional," she replied. "And every conversation about that house turns into you acting like you're the only one who lost a mother." I felt something cold slide down the center of my chest. I'd spent most of my life making excuses for my mother because it was easier than admitting what she was. Not evil. Not monstrous. Just gifted at rearranging reality until her comfort sat in the center of it and everyone else was expected to orbit. "You sold my grandmother's house," I said carefully, and decided not to mention it because I might have feelings. "We all have feelings, Claire." "Did Scott know?" Another pause. "Yes," she said. I shut my eyes. My brother, who had missed more doctor visits than I could count. My brother, who came to town for the funeral with an expensive duffel bag and a speech about how family should stay close, then left the next morning because he had to get back for a client meeting. He knew. What about Aunt Denise? Yes. So everybody knew except me. Don't do that. Do what? Turn this into some performance where you're the victim. Emma looked at me then, really looked, and I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I forced my voice down. How much? What? How much did you sell it for? 420,000. The number hit me, but not the way she probably expected. It wasn't about money. It was about the speed of it. Ruth Holloway's house, reduced to a number spoken in a flat voice by a daughter who had once rolled her eyes because her mother wanted to keep old recipe cards. Were you ever going to ask if I wanted anything from the house? I said. You got plenty when she was alive. That one landed exactly where she intended. People like my mother know how to use gratitude as a weapon. She knew the house had sheltered me after my divorce. She knew Grandma had helped me with Emma. She knew there were years of love in that place. And she knew how to make all of it sound like debt. Before I could answer, she said, "Look, the proceeds are already being distributed. This is done. Don't make it uglier than it has to be." Then she hung up. Emma whispered, "Mom?" I turned to her and saw tears she was trying not to let fall. "She had my handprint on her pantry wall," Emma said. "From when Grandma let me paint that little flower." I swallowed hard. I know, baby. Can they just throw that away? There are moments in life when your grief hardens into something sharper. Not rage exactly. Rage burns hot and fast. This was cleaner than that. Colder. A blade being honed. I looked back at the house I couldn't enter and said, "I don't know yet. But no one's throwing away anything else until I understand what happened." The first person who helped me wasn't family. It was Mr. Alvarez, Grandma's next-door neighbor, who had lived beside her for 27 years and mowed the strip of grass between their yards without ever discussing whose strip it technically was. He was out watering his tomatoes when I came back that evening after the workers left. He clicked off the hose when he saw me and didn't ask stupid questions like, "Are you okay?" He just said, "Your grandma would hate that dumpster." I laughed once, despite everything. She'd throw it into the street. She'd make me help. We stood there looking at the dark house. "I didn't know they sold it," I said. "I figured." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "Your mother came by with some realtor-looking fellow a while back. 2, maybe 3 months after the funeral. Then a few more people after that." "A realtor?" He nodded. "Gray suit. Too much smile." I let that settle. Then he frowned in a way that suggested he was deciding whether to say something. "What?" I asked. He shifted his weight. "Maybe nothing. But about 4 years ago, after your grandma got out of the hospital that time, the pneumonia scare, I drove her downtown." "For what?" "To the county building. She said she had paperwork." I stared at him. "I offered to wait in the car," he said. "She told me no, come inside, in case I croak on the tile and need a witness." He smiled a little at the memory. "We sat with some clerk, then a notary. She signed something. Took maybe 30 minutes. My pulse picked up." "Did she say what it was?" "She said," he squinted, reaching for the exact wording, "I'm making sure the right person can't be pushed out when I'm gone." For a second, the air changed around me. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" He looked genuinely pained. "Because I figured you knew." I didn't sleep much that night. At 8:02 the next morning, I was standing in the county recorder's office with a paper ticket in my hand and my stomach somewhere near my knees. The woman at the desk was in her 60s, wearing reading glasses on a beaded chain and the expression of someone who had seen every kind of human foolishness there was to see. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need records on a property," I said, giving her the address. She typed, clicked, frowned, typed again. Then she looked up at me. "Well," she said. "That's interesting. There are few sentences more dangerous than that in a government office." She turned the monitor slightly so I could see. There, listed beneath the original deed from when my grandparents bought the house, was another filing from 4 years earlier. Quitclaim deed. Grantor, Ruth Holloway, unmarried. Grantees, Ruth Holloway and Claire Holloway, joint tenants with right of survivorship. For a second, the letters didn't make sense. Then they did. My grandmother had put my name on the deed. Not in a will. Not as a promise. Not as something vague that could be argued over at a dining room table after casseroles. Legally. Officially. Recorded. The clerk must have seen my face because her tone softened. Do you want certified copies? Yes, I said immediately. Please. While she printed them, my hands started shaking. All those months after the funeral, every time my mother said we needed to decide what to do, every time Scott texted that maybe selling was easiest, every time Aunt Denise said, Ruth would want everyone treated fairly, they either hadn't known, or they had and hoped I didn't. I didn't know which possibility was worse. I took the copy straight to a lawyer. Not because I'm the sue first type. I'm not. I'm the keep the peace too long type. The absorb discomfort until you get sick type. The make excuses type. But grief strips away some habits. Betrayal strips away the rest. The attorney I found was a woman named Janet Mercer, recommended by the receptionist at my office after I nearly started crying in the supply closet when she asked how my weekend went. Janet had silver hair cut blunt at the chin and an office that smelled like coffee and old leather. She read the deed twice, then asked, who signed the sale documents? My mother, I think. Maybe my aunt too. Were they executors of the estate? My mother handled probate. I'm not even sure where that stands. Janet leaned back. If this deed was properly recorded, and it appears it was, then when your grandmother passed, ownership transferred to you by survivorship. Depending on how the sale was done, they may have tried to sell property they didn't own. My chest went tight. Can they do that? People try all kinds of things. The question is whether the buyer had title insurance, whether the closing company missed this record, and whether anyone misrepresented the ownership structure. She folded her hands. But let me be very clear, Claire. If your name was on the deed as joint tenant with survivorship, your family had no authority to sell that house without you. It's strange what moments rearrange your life. You imagine justice feeling triumphant. It doesn't, not at first. At first it feels like nausea. At first it feels like a chair being pulled out from under years of memory, and then suddenly set back in place with violent force. My grandmother had seen something coming. That was the thought that hurt the most. Some part of her had known I might need protecting from my own family. Janet sent demand letters that afternoon, to the buyer, the title company, the real estate attorney, and my mother. By dinner time, my phone was exploding. Scott called first. Claire, what the hell did you do? He snapped the second I answered. Found out the house was mine. It was not yours. It is now. Oh my God, listen to yourself. No, Scott. You listen. Did you know my name was on the deed? Silence. Did you know? I repeated. He exhaled hard. Mom said there were old papers, but the estate lawyer thought the house was still part of probate. Convenient. Don't start that. You all sold Grandma's house without telling me. We thought you'd drag it out for months because you're sentimental. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Sentimental. That's what you're calling it. He lowered his voice the way people do when they want to sound reasonable after being cruel. Look, some of the money's already gone. There it was. The real panic. Gone where? That's not your business. If you sold my house, it absolutely is. He muttered something I couldn't catch, then said, Mom paid off debt. Denise took her share. And he stopped. And you what? It doesn't matter. It matters now. Fine, he said, suddenly angry. I used some of it for the business. Scott's business had been 4 different things in 6 years. A sports marketing startup, a custom t-shirt venture, an online coaching brand, and most recently a bourbon bar concept he talked about like investors were lined up around the block. "How much?" I asked. He didn't answer. "How much, Scott?" 80. My mouth fell open. $80,000? It was a bridge loan to myself. "I'm waiting on capital." "You took money from a house you had no right to sell and put it into another fantasy? Go to hell." He hung up on me. The next call was my mother, and somehow she was angrier than he was. "How dare you involve lawyers," she said. "How dare you sell a house you didn't own? You are humiliating this family." I sat at my kitchen table staring at Emma's math homework. "No, Mom. You did that. Your grandmother put your name on there for convenience. You don't know that. She would never have wanted you taking everything." "Everything?" I said quietly. "I would have let everyone take what mattered to them. I would have made space. I would have had a conversation. You know, what family does." "Don't moralize at me, Claire. Where were you when I was paying for your father's mistakes? When I was trying to hold this family together?" I almost admired the nerve. She had skipped straight from denial to martyrdom. "Where were you when Grandma needed someone at 2 a.m. because she couldn't breathe?" I asked. "Where were you when the pharmacy messed up her medication and I had to leave work? Where were you when she fell in the bathroom and I was the one who sat on the floor with her until the pain meds kicked in because she was embarrassed to let the EMTs help her to the toilet?" My mother went silent. Then she said, cold as ice, "So this is about being rewarded?" "No," I said. "This is about being erased." She hung up too. For 3 days, my family treated me like I had detonated a bomb in their lives for the crime of refusing to disappear quietly. Aunt Denise sent a text full of phrases like misunderstanding, legal technicality, and surely we can resolve this privately. My cousin Mallory posted something vague on Facebook about greed changing people after death. One of my mother's church friends called to check on me and somehow managed to mention that my mother was under terrible stress. That's the thing about certain families. They can stab you in the ribs, then act wounded by the blood. The buyer's attorney called on day 4. His name was Trent Calloway, and he spoke in the flat professional tone of a man billing by the quarter hour. "My client purchased the property in good faith," he said. "He has already invested in demolition and permitting. Then your client should probably speak to the people who sold him something they didn't own. He expects a solution. So do I." He paused. "Would your client consider accepting a financial settlement in exchange for ratifying the sale?" It was the first time anyone had called me the client in a matter involving my own life, and weirdly, it steadied me. "How much?" He named a number that would have changed my year but not my heart. I looked around my apartment, the peeling baseboards, the rent increase notice on the counter, Emma's sneakers by the door with the sole starting to separate. I thought about how easy it would be to take the money. Pay off debt. Start a college fund. Maybe move somewhere with a little yard. Then I saw Grandma's kitchen in my mind. The pantry wall with Emma's painted flower. The pencil marks inside the laundry room door where Grandma measured my height and later Emma's. The dent in the hallway trim where my grandfather had dropped a toolbox in 1987 and Ruth refused to patch it because life leaves marks. "I'm not sanding them all off." "I'm not selling," I said. "Mrs. Holloway. Ms. Holloway. And no." He sighed. "Then this may become more expensive for everyone." "It already is." When I hung up, I cried for the first time since the recorder's office. Not because I was uncertain. Because being right doesn't stop something from hurting. That weekend, I went back to the house with Janet's letter in my purse and a locksmith appointment set for the next morning. The buyer's crew had stopped work once the title issue surfaced, but the place looked stunned, violated. Cabinets stood open. Rugs were rolled back. A pile of things sat on the curb beneath a blue tarp. Mr. Alvarez came over carrying a thermos of coffee and handed it to me without a word. I started going through the tarp. Old curtains. A lamp from the den. A box of National Geographics. One framed school photo of me from 10th grade, hair unfortunate, smile forced. Then, buried under a cracked serving tray, I found Grandma's red metal recipe box. I sat right there on the grass and opened it. Most of the cards were exactly where they'd always been, her meatloaf, her biscuits, her peach cobbler written in slanted blue ink. But in the back, tucked behind deviled eggs, was an envelope with my name on it. Claire. Just that. The handwriting was hers. My fingers went numb. I opened it carefully, like the paper itself might bruise. Sweetheart. If you're reading this after I'm gone, then either you found what I hoped you would, or people have already started acting exactly how I expect them to. I'm too old to play dumb, so I won't. Families get funny when property is involved. Grief mixes with money and old resentments, and suddenly people are counting casseroles and Christmas visits like receipts. You are not crazy, and you are not selfish if you want this house protected. I put your name on the deed because I know this home has been a shelter for you and Emma, and because shelter matters. I also did it because I have watched the rest of this family my whole life, and I know how quickly what Mom would have wanted becomes code for what's easiest for us. If there is a fight, I'm sorry. I wanted to spare you one. But I have learned that sometimes the only way to leave a blessing is to leave a boundary. Use your judgment. Keep the house if it helps you build a better life. Sell it if that is truly what serves you. But let it be your decision, made without guilt from people who only show up once the hard part is done. Love is not proven by who cries the loudest after a death. It is proven by who brings soup, who answers midnight calls, who notices when the porch light bulb burned out and changes it without being asked. I know who was here. Love. Grandma. I read it 3 times. By the end, I was crying so hard I had to press the letter against my mouth. Mr. Alvarez pretended not to notice. He just stared out at the street and said softly, "Sounds like Ruth." There are griefs that make you feel abandoned. Then there are griefs that reach back and hold you. That letter did both. It also changed the fight. Up until then, I had been defending myself legally. Now I understood I was also defending my grandmother's last clear choice. And once you understand that, compromise stops looking noble just because it's quiet. The next revelation came from a banker named Elise who had known my grandmother for years and recognized me when I came in asking whether there were any safe deposit records tied to her estate. She couldn't share everything without proper authorization, but once Janet got involved, we learned Grandma had maintained a small box my mother never mentioned in probate paperwork. Inside were my grandfather's watch, a pair of earrings wrapped in tissue, and a manila envelope labeled house. In it were copies of the deed, a note from the notary, and a short handwritten timeline. June 4th, Carol asked if I'd thought about selling after I'm gone. June 11th, heard Carol on phone saying Claire doesn't need a whole house. June 19th, made appointment. June 23rd, signed deed. Peace of mind. I sat in Janet's office holding that timeline and felt physically sick. This hadn't been some abstract fear of family conflict. Grandma had heard my mother making plans while she was still alive. Janet looked grim. This is powerful. Not necessarily dispositive on its own, but powerful. Does that mean she knew? I asked. It means your grandmother believed she needed to protect your claim from your family. My mother denied it, of course. When Janet's office sent copies during discovery, Mom called me in tears. I cannot believe you think I was scheming against my own mother, she said. I don't think it, I answered. She wrote it down. She was old. She misheard. She wrote dates. You always believe the worst about me. That sentence almost made me laugh. Children of difficult parents spend years being trained to doubt their own memory. If you confront them, they cry. If you hold a boundary, they call it cruelty. If you tell the truth, they accuse you of rewriting history. But somewhere in the middle of all this, I had stopped needing my mother to admit what she'd done in order to know it was real. You sold the house, I said. That part isn't memory. It happened. Then I ended the call before she could turn herself into the victim again. A week later, the story got even uglier. Scott showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door and nearly closed it again. He looked bad, unshaven, expensive sneakers, frantic eyes. He smelled like cologne and stress. 5 minutes, he said. Please. Emma was at a friend's house, so I let him in. He stood in my kitchen like he didn't recognize it, which in fairness, he probably didn't. Scott hadn't visited in over a year. You need to settle, he said immediately. Hello to you too. Claire, I'm serious. I gathered. He scrubbed a hand over his face. That money is gone. I know. No, you don't. He lowered his voice. It wasn't just the business. My stomach turned. What else? He sank into a chair and stared at the floor. I borrowed against things. What things? Credit lines. Personal notes. He looked up. I had investors. Scott. I thought once the bar opened, I could cover it. There is no bar. He winced. Not yet. It came out in pieces. The business wasn't just a vanity project. It was a whole. He'd been gambling too, not in casinos, not the obvious kind, but sports betting, crypto swings, quick-turn risks dressed up as entrepreneurship. He had burned through his own savings, then leaned on the expected house proceeds like they were already in his pocket. How much trouble are you in? I asked. He gave me a number so large I actually sat down. I was going to fix it, he said. By stealing from family? I didn't steal. You sold property you didn't own. He flinched. Mom said the paperwork was clean. Did you want that to be true badly enough that you never asked questions? He didn't answer. Then he said something that stunned me. She promised me. I stared at him. Who? Grandma. No, she didn't. She told me once, years ago, that there'd always be something left for me if I got myself together. The sadness that hit me then was different from anger. It was the sadness of watching someone build a whole moral defense out of a sentence that had never meant what he wanted it to mean. She probably meant love, I said quietly. Maybe a chance. Not a blank check. His eyes got wet and he looked away. For the first time, I saw him not as the golden boy who got away with everything, but as a scared middle-aged man who had spent his whole life mistaking indulgence for rescue. He said, if you blow this up, I'm done. The old Claire would have folded right there. The version of me trained on keeping peace, smoothing edges, absorbing damage so other people could remain comfortable. The daughter who knew exactly how to put her own needs at the bottom of the pile. But pain teaches some expensive lessons. If I don't blow it up, I said, I'm telling Emma that the only way to stay loved in this family is to let people take from you. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. Do you hear yourself? I asked. You came here because you're scared, and I'm sorry you're scared. I mean that. But you are not more entitled to Grandma's house because you made worse decisions than I did. He stood up so fast the chair scraped. You think you're better than us now? No, I said. I think I'm done being easier to betray. He left without another word. After he was gone, I sat at the table shaking. Boundaries are not glamorous. They don't feel empowering in the moment. Mostly they feel like grief with a backbone. The official mediation was scheduled 2 weeks later. By then, the title company was in full panic mode. Their search had somehow failed to catch Grandma's recorded deed, and the buyer, an investor named Paul Dresner, had already spent money on permits, labor, and carrying costs. My mother and Aunt Denise had moved most of the sale proceeds out of the original account. Scott was clearly drowning. Everyone wanted the cheapest version of resolution. That cheapest version was me. Accept money. Sign papers. Let the house go. Janet laid out the options in plain language. You can force a challenge to the sale. That will be ugly, expensive, and slow. Or you can negotiate from a position of strength. But do not let anyone tell you you're obligated to save them from consequences they created. I nodded. Then I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't gone since the funeral. Not because I didn't love Grandma. Because I hated the finality of her name on stone. But that afternoon the sky was low and gray, and I needed to sit somewhere no one could interrupt me. I took a folding chair from my trunk and sat in front of her grave like I was waiting for her to come out on the porch. I don't know what to do, I admitted aloud. Wind moved through the trees. I know what's fair legally, I said. I don't know what's right. Because that was the real question, wasn't it? Not whether I could win. What kind of win I wanted. Keeping the house out of spite would poison it. Selling it just to end the conflict would betray myself. Taking a payout could help my daughter, but every time I imagined the bulldozers coming later, I felt sick. I sat there so long the cemetery groundskeeper drove by twice. On the way back to my car, I remembered something Grandma told me the year after my divorce. You don't make big choices from fresh pain, she said when I was trying to decide whether to move states just to prove I could. You make them from clear values. Pain shouts. Values stay put. By the time I got home, I knew mine. The house was not a prize. It was a responsibility. And if I kept it, it had to become more than a monument to loss. Mediation began at 9 on a Wednesday in a conference room with bad coffee and no windows. My mother wore navy, the color she uses when she wants to look innocent. Aunt Denise looked exhausted. Scott looked like he'd aged 5 years in a month. Across from them sat Paul Dresner, the buyer, with his attorney Trent. The title company had its own counsel. Janet sat beside me with 3 binders and the expression of a woman who chewed up men like Trent before breakfast. No one made small talk. The mediator, a soft-voiced retired judge, started with process. Then people began explaining themselves in tones meant to sound practical and aggrieved. The buyer wanted compensation or clear title. The title company wanted limited liability. My mother wanted family sensitivity. Janet almost smiled at that one. When it was my turn, the mediator said, Ms. Holloway, what outcome are you seeking? I looked around the room. At the people who had once eaten Thanksgiving rolls from Grandma's table and were now talking about her house like contaminated inventory. At minimum, I said, I want everyone here to stop pretending this was an accident that hurt no one. My mother shifted, offended already. I found out strangers owned my grandmother's house when they were tearing it apart, I continued. Nobody called me. Nobody asked me. Nobody checked with me. And my grandmother had already made her wishes clear enough to file them with the county. Trent interjected. To be fair, intent is not the same as. Janet slid the certified deed across the table. Ownership is. The mediator held up a hand. Let her finish. So I did. I talked about caring for Grandma. Not to score points, but because facts matter. I talked about Emma's connection to the house. I talked about the letter. I talked about the timeline from the safe deposit box. My mother's face went hard when I mentioned the note about hearing her on the phone. That is outrageous hearsay, Aunt Denise snapped. Maybe, Janet said. It's also consistent with the recorded deed and your client's behavior. My clients? Denise shot back. I'm family. Janet didn't blink. Then perhaps you should have acted like it. The room went still. Later, in separate caucuses, numbers started flying around. The buyer increased the settlement offer. The title company offered to contribute. My mother cried in one room and glared in another. Then, just after lunch, the mediator came into our room and said something unexpected. Your brother wants to speak to everyone together. Janet looked at me. You don't have to agree. I thought about it, then nodded. When we all reconvened, Scott was pale. He kept rubbing his palms on his slacks. "I need to say something," he began. My mother whispered, "Scott." "No, Mom." He looked at me first, then at the mediator. "I knew there were issues with the deed before closing," he said. My mother went rigid. Scott kept going. "Not all the details. But enough to know it might not be clean. The title company asked for a follow-up on an older filing, and Mom said the estate lawyer had handled it. She told me not to make trouble." Every head at the table turned toward my mother. Her mouth opened. "That is not what I said." Scott laughed once, broken. "You said Claire would drag it out forever and Grandma only put her name on there because she was sick and confused." My chest tightened. "Scott," Denise hissed. But something had shifted in him. Maybe fear. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the simple relief of finally dropping the lie he'd been carrying. "I took money I shouldn't have taken," he said, voice shaking. "That part's on me. But we all knew Claire wasn't being told. We all knew." I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired down to the bone. My mother stared at him like he'd betrayed her, which would have been funny if it weren't so sad. That was always the deepest sin in her world, not doing harm, but refusing to protect the image of innocence around it. The mediation broke after that, and the tone changed completely. By 5 o'clock, the framework was on the table. The sale would be unwound. The buyer would recover part of his costs from the title company and pursue the rest from the sellers if he chose. My mother and Aunt Denise would be required to return their shares. Scott would be personally liable for what he had taken and could not return. And the house would remain mine. Legally, that should have been the end. Emotionally, the real climax came in the parking lot. My mother caught me before I got to my car. "Claire." I turned. She had taken off her jacket. She looked older than she had a month ago, but not softer. "I hope you're happy," she said. It was such a familiar line, the kind meant to make joy itself feel shameful. For a second I was 15 again, standing in a kitchen being told that my honest reaction had ruined dinner. Then I wasn't. "No," I said. "I'm heartbroken." She blinked, like that answer hadn't fit the script. "You think this was easy for me?" she asked. "I think almost nothing in this has been about me for you." "That's not fair." Neither was finding out from demolition workers. Her eyes flashed. "Your grandmother never should have done this." There it was. The truest thing she'd said all day. Not that Grandma hadn't done it. That she shouldn't have. Because in my mother's world, love was acceptable. Preference was not. Sacrifice was acceptable. Boundaries were betrayal. "She did do it," I said. "And the reason she did is standing right in front of me." My mother's face changed then, not to remorse, exactly. More like the brief nakedness of someone who realizes they have been seen clearly and can't talk their way out of it. "You always needed to be special to her," she said quietly. The little girl inside me still wanted to argue. Wanted to explain that I never needed special treatment, only truth. Wanted to say I would have shared almost anything if anyone had simply respected me enough to ask. The woman I had become didn't waste the breath. "I needed a mother," I said. "But here we are." Then I got in my car and left. The house was a mess when I got it back. The front room smelled like plaster dust. The kitchen cabinets had half their contents boxed and mislabeled. Somebody had ripped down the curtain rods in the guest room. My grandfather's workbench in the basement had been shoved sideways and gouged. But the pantry wall still had Emma's flower. The laundry room door still had the height marks. And under the sink, unbelievably, there was still an old tin of spare light bulbs exactly where Grandma always kept them. The first Saturday after the settlement, Emma and I spent 6 hours cleaning. Mr. Alvarez came over with his push broom. My friend Tasha from work brought gloves and pizza. At noon, the mailman knocked just to say he was glad the place wasn't being turned into another gray and white soulless flip. Unexpected kindness doesn't usually arrive in grand gestures. It shows up with bleach wipes, folding tables, and someone saying, "I've got the garage if you've got the labels." Halfway through scrubbing the fridge, Emma said, "Are we moving in?" I sat back on my heels. That had been the question underneath everything, and I still hadn't answered it out loud. The truth was, the house needed work. So did I. My apartment lease still had months on it. And I didn't want to use the place only as an escape hatch, like grief had handed me a reward. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Emma nodded like she understood more than kids are supposed to. Then she said, "Grandma Ruth always let people come over when they were having a hard time." I smiled. She did. Maybe we could do that too. The simplicity of it hit me harder than any legal victory had. Over the next few months, that idea took shape. Not all at once. Not in some movie montage miracle. Real life is slower than that. There were insurance headaches, plumbing issues, estate cleanup, and a roof repair that made me briefly consider setting the whole structure on fire myself. Scott filed bankruptcy. Aunt Denise stopped speaking to everyone. My mother told half the church I had manipulated an old woman and the other half that she was praying for reconciliation. I let her. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let people tell on themselves. I kept the apartment for a while and spent weekends at the house. Then evenings too. Emma did homework at the old dining table while I sorted boxes. We found my grandfather's army letters, my baby teeth in a film canister, and 3 dish towels Grandma had apparently been hiding from guests because they were too nice for ordinary Tuesday. There were hard moments. I cried the day I finally washed Grandma's last mug and put it away. I cried when I found one of her voicemail messages on an old landline service account, just her saying, "Claire, pick up milk if you pass the store, and don't let Emma watch that spooky cartoon before bed." I played it 6 times before I could delete it. I cried the first time I slept there alone and the house made all its old nighttime sounds without her breathing in the next room. But grief changed texture in that place. It stopped being only absence. It became company. By spring, I knew I didn't want to sell. I also knew I didn't want the house to become a shrine. So I made a decision my old self would have thought was too bold. I refinanced enough to stabilize the repairs, kept ownership in my name, and turned the downstairs back room, what used to be Grandma's sewing room, into a free community space 2 nights a week for women in transition. Divorced, widowed, recently laid off, caregiving, overwhelmed, it didn't matter. If you needed a table, coffee, and people who wouldn't flinch at the truth, the door was open. We called it Ruth's room, though Emma insisted Grandma would roll her eyes at the sign and say it sounded too fancy. Sometimes 6 women came. Sometimes 14. We swapped job leads, babysitter names, cheap crockpot recipes, therapist recommendations, and practical advice no one puts in greeting cards. No one gave speeches. That would have embarrassed Grandma. But every time I unlocked the door, I thought of her line, "Shelter matters." Scott surprised me the following summer. He called and asked if he could come by, not to argue, not to negotiate, just to talk. I almost said no. Then I heard something in his voice I'd never heard before. Not panic. Not charm. Humility, maybe. Or the beginning of it. He arrived carrying a box. Inside were things he'd found in storage after the sale unraveled: Grandma's quilt stand, a stack of church cookbooks, my high school debate trophy, and the ceramic bird Emma made in 2nd grade that I thought had been lost in the cleanout. "I should have brought these sooner," he said. "Yes," I replied. He nodded, accepting it. We sat on the back steps where we used to eat popsicles as kids. He told me he was in treatment for gambling addiction. He had gotten a regular job with a beverage distributor. He was renting a plain apartment and, for once in his life, knew exactly what his monthly income actually was. "I spent a lot of years believing wanting something hard enough meant I deserved it," he said. I didn't rescue him from the sentence. After a while he said, "I'm sorry." Not the slippery kind. Not if you felt hurt. Not things got messy. Just sorry. It didn't erase what happened. But it mattered. Me too, I said. We're not best friends now. Real life is more modest than that. But he shows up sometimes. He fixes loose steps. He brings groceries when he comes. Last Thanksgiving he washed dishes without being asked, and I nearly called the newspaper. My mother is more complicated. There was no dramatic reconciliation. No movie scene apology in the rain. About 9 months after mediation, she came to Ruth's room open house and stood awkwardly in the doorway while women she didn't know praised the soup and the wallpaper and the feeling of the place. She walked into the kitchen and touched the counter where Grandma used to roll biscuit dough. "It still smells like her," she said. For the first time in a long time, there was no edge in her voice. Just grief. Grief stripped of strategy is one of the saddest sounds in the world. "I know," I said. She cried then. Quietly. Like someone had finally stopped performing and run out of energy. I handed her a dish towel because that felt more honest than a hug. We are not healed in the sentimental sense. We are careful. We are limited. We speak more truth than we used to, and sometimes less often. She knows I will leave her room now if she starts bending reality. I know she is still my mother, and that some people only know how to love through control until life humiliates them enough to try another language. Maybe that's grace. Not forgetting. Not pretending. Just refusing to keep lying for someone. 2 years after I dropped that peach pie on the porch, Emma and I moved into the house for good. She took the yellow curtain room. I took what used to be Grandma's, though for weeks I felt like I was borrowing it. On the first night, we ate takeout Chinese at the kitchen table because the stove had just been repaired and we were too tired to cook. Emma looked around and said, "It feels happy again." I looked at the pantry wall, the flower she painted years earlier still visible under fresh clear coat, protected now on purpose. "Yeah," I said. "It does. Sometimes people hear a story like mine and want a clean ending. The bad family gets punished. The good daughter gets the house. Justice is served in neat portions and everyone learns the lesson they were supposed to learn. Real life is sloppier than that. What I got was not revenge, at least not the satisfying movie version. I got paperwork, strain, legal bills, awkward holidays, and the permanent knowledge that some of the people who shared my blood were willing to gamble my grief for convenience. But I also got something better than revenge. I got clarity. I learned that being kind is not the same as being available for harm. I learned that guilt is often just the fee controlling people charge when you stop cooperating. I learned that love without respect will ask you to disappear and call it peace. And I learned that the people who truly belong to you are not always the ones who say family the loudest. They are the ones who show up before there is anything to inherit. My grandmother knew that. That's why she didn't just leave me a house. She left me proof. Proof that she saw me. Proof that I had not imagined the imbalance. Proof that boundaries can be an act of love. Proof that shelter is not only walls and windows, but the right to stand in your own life without being pushed out of it by people who think your softness makes you movable. Every now and then, someone in town still mentions the story. Usually it starts with, "Can you believe what your family did?" I used to tense up when I heard that. Now I just smile a little and say, "They forgot one thing." If the person looks curious, I let them wonder for a second. Then I say, "They forgot she knew exactly who was there." And that, more than the deed, is the part that stays with me. Not the legal win. Not the market value. Not even the house itself. The knowing. That a woman I loved saw my life clearly enough to leave me something stronger than sentiment. She left me the courage to stop accepting less than truth from the people closest to me. She left me a home, yes, but more than that, she left me permission. Permission to protect what matters. Permission to stop confusing self-betrayal with loyalty. Permission to build something warm out of what almost became another family ruin. On summer evenings, when the windows are open and the neighborhood smells like cut grass, women still gather in Ruth's room. Emma, taller now, helps set out mugs. Scott sometimes carries in folding chairs. Mr. Alvarez brings tomatoes nobody asked for and everyone takes. The house fills with voices, with stories, with practical advice and laughter and tears no one apologizes for. The walls remember all of it. And if Grandma was right, and I know she was, then this old house is telling the truth about us now. It's saying that love is a casserole dropped on a porch after bad news. That survival can sound like dishes clinking in a kitchen after midnight. That justice is sometimes quiet, signed in blue ink years before the storm arrives. That the people who carry you through your worst days are the ones worth building around. And that what saves a family isn't pretending nothing happened. It's finally refusing to lose the right people. If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more.